Welcome to World Hemophilia Day and the discussion on the future of hemophilia care and hemophilia products. Thank you, Flora and Brian, for joining us today. We have
It's a
the
pleasure.
thank you. So we have the EHC novel products review coming out in the next few weeks, and we're looking at information coming out of EHAD. And I had some questions for both of you, if that is okay. We'll go through it one at a time. So we'll talk about replacement therapies first, and then the non-replacement therapies, some of the gene therapies, and then rare bleeding disorders, von Willebrand's, and we'll get back to some of the changes that we're seeing. So a question for both of you, first of all. With EHLs, at EHAD, there was a lot of submissions for EHL trough levels of 3 and 5%. Flora, in your experience, are you seeing a general trend in countries with good access to EHLs, an increase to improve patients' trough levels?
Actually, I did make the analysis recently, and we sent some abstract to the ISTH. Now we're going to see what's going to happen. But our experience was very positive. I mean, at the beginning, all of us, we were just switching all our factor 9 patient to the extended half-life product, but for factor 8 we were waiting to see how is the result, and the switch was very how can I say, it was slower than factor 9. And but the results are good, and the patients are doing well, and really the number of infusion are less, and the trough level is higher. So I think people are getting more and more confident to switch most of the patient. And if you're not seeing any side effect for the patients, because it's not really clever to switch, of course, all of them when a new product is coming to the market, you never know how is the safety. But if the safety is good, as it seems to be, I think now is a time to switch really most of our patients to the extended half-life. And I have a feeling that lots of countries, they are doing that.
Thank you. And so in the switching and increasing half-lives, for the countries that have less access to clotting factor concentrates, first, Flora, how should they be thinking about using these concentrates? And then Brian, maybe we talk about how the patient organizations can help in working with EHLs and thinking about it from a patient organization and improving access concept.
That's actually is a difficult question, Declan, because I think the most important point for those countries that they do not have easy access is to have more access to more products that could be available for the patient. Now, in my mind, after a few years of extended half-life, as I said, and the safety of the product, so if the company could produce the extended half-life product, and these products are safe, and the price is not jumping, I would prefer for all countries around the world to use the extended half-life product. But we have to see whether that is possible in terms of production and in terms of cost. And if I'm in a country that I have accessibility for product, for the standard product, and some of product are extended half-life product, I have to make a stratification of my patient and to choose which patient should go for which of them. But if I have a possibility to use the extended half-life product, even in those countries that the amount of the product is less, I would go for the extended. So my main message is, this is a politic in the future to understand, is there any sense yet to go with a recombinant standard product when the efficacy of the product is higher and the safety are similar, at least similar. We have to see the results of the POPs study, but we have to, if we do not see any problem in terms of side effect, I don't really understand why we are not switching. We do not have to switch all the production from a standard to the extended half-life product if there is no difficulty in terms of production.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, these to me are not that new. They've been on the market for 5 or 6 years. Now, as you know, Declan, here in Ireland, for example, we took a very systematic and national approach to this. We looked at this a couple of years ago, and we switched the entire population to extended half-life factors. You asked about preparing patient organizations or helping to prepare patients. I think we did a lot of workshops, we did a lot of educational meetings and events, and the people with hemophilia understood that these products could be either used with less frequency of infusion, or in fact to give you higher trough levels and more protection from bleeding. Or in the case of EHL factor 9s, you could achieve both aims. So I agree with Flora. I think we should be seeing more of a switch to extended half-life factors. I think they have definite advantages. We've certainly seen that, and I very much welcome the EDQM recommendations for the increased trough levels. I think a trough level of 1% is a 40-year-old idea, which we should be moving beyond. And certainly 3 to 5% is the minimum we should be looking for. Now, we're now seeing in Ireland, we're seeing trough levels of at least 8% for everybody with severe factor 9 deficiency, and about 3% for factor 8. And I think it's led to a very nice improvement in quality of life.
I fully agree with Brian.
Yeah, it's I'm always struck by the parent who was talking about treating his child less often and having more protection and feeling very, very good about it. I'll come back to so on that point of the,
and just to say, Declan, that point was made 7 years ago at the first DHC novel products meeting by a parent.
Yeah.
When he talked about his child at the time was on a clinical trial for an EHL factor 8, and he saw a distinct advantage in that.
Yeah, and even so, I'm not sure was it at ASH last year or EHAD, but there's some really interesting, like for the countries with less access to the EHLs, there's some really interesting data coming out of the low dose prophylaxis for small children. I want to pick you back on that point that you said about the 1% being a 40-year-old idea, and 3 to 5% for 8, and maybe up to 9 or up to 8% for the 9s. The Denule data, this is one that we see all of the time. It's everywhere for the last few years, and that's kind of indicates that once you dip below 12%, then you're talking about the small damage that we see in patients with good prophylaxis for the last few years. We start hearing about the stiff ankle syndrome group where there's just no real deformities, but they are sore. Is that something that we should be trying to achieve with EHLs? And if so, is it the same for 8 and for 9? Or are there any things coming along in the future that are maybe easier in terms of products or clinical trials for patients with EHLs?
Actually, Declan, I was thinking to this subject very frequently in the last period, because I think what is happening now at this stage, the clinicians are thinking, if I'm using the gene therapy, I have to target this. If I'm using the non-replacement therapy, I have to use that target. I think we need to come up with some conclusion and say which target I do need indifferently about what instrument I'm going to use, and which of the tool that I have available is bringing me close to that target level. I think now, with the improvement that we did have with all different strategies, there is no way to stay with the recommendation as Brian was mentioning about 1% or 3%. That's too old. We have to forget about that. And now I think definitely we need to target about 10 to 15%, which I couldn't even think about 3 years ago. I was telling something like that. But I think this is the point. The technology moved so fast. But we have to be cautious about bringing that kind of target. How is the cost of that? Not in terms only about the economy, but also about the safety issue. So if I'm going to have 10 or 15% of target level, if I'm using, for example, extended half-life product, how many times I have to inject myself, and what is the pros and cons of that? If I'm using the non-replacement therapy, what are again the positive and negative point of that? And if I'm using the gene therapy, which amount of the vector I should inject, and how much I know about the safety of that one. And finally, I have to know how much is going to cost me each of this strategy. Once I have that cleared up, I can decide what I'm spending and what I'm getting. This is the total thought I had in my mind. But there is no doubt that we are now using in our clinic activity the ultrasound for all our patients to see really whether there is any minimal amount of bleeding that we are not able to see. And we are trying to understand more and more. And there is no doubt that we can really point out with a higher trough level. And what we were using is not enough. And what is exactly the target level that we have to point, I think we still need more time. We still need to understand, for example, is it really convenient in terms of what we know to go over 15%? If I go, what I'm going to get in terms of the safety and efficacy using every instrument that we have mentioned since now. So I think this is what the scientific and clinicians should think about.
Brian, you
Yeah, on that, I think there's a growing body of compelling evidence that clinical optimization would require a trough level of 12 to 15%. And
Yeah.
I totally agree with Flora. I think that's where we need to be aiming. However, we have to marry clinical optimization with economic reality. The only reason that the trough was 1% for so many years is that factor was not 1 cent per unit. It was expensive. So you could legitimately say now that we accept the Denul graph, for example, and the other evidence, and say that yes, we should be aiming for a trough of 15% now. The problem is that that's not economically viable in many countries, including Western Europe at this point in time. So I think that 3 to 5% is a step in the right direction. And I expect that over coming EDQM meetings over coming years to change upwards from 3 to 5, maybe to 7 to 10, 12, 15. Now, I think that it is very, very difficult to achieve trough levels of 15% with current factors, or even with extended half-life factors. You probably do with extended half-life 9, not with 8. But now with alternatives, with emicizumab, with perhaps improved EHL products like BIVV001, and certainly with gene therapy, we can see a pathway to getting troughs of 12 to 15%.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
I agree with Brian.
Excellent. All right. So we'll move on to some of the discussions around the non-replacement therapies. There's been a lot of uptake in terms of non-replacement therapies that are currently on the market. Emicizumab, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask both of you is that when it comes to the discussions between the clinicians and the patients, and how is that conversation going? What should patients and people be asking themselves in thinking about a decision to switch or not to switch? If both of you could comment on that, that'd be great.
You know, Declan, that depends if we are talking about switching or this is the first treatment. For example, for those people who were used to utilize other type of treatment like, you know, standard extended half-life product, there is a history and knowing about what they have to measure, what they have to see, how they have to evaluate the clinical efficacy, and there is a lot of thought around that. But for those patients that they didn't have chance to use all these different type of product, the conversation is completely different. So let's go to those first group, people who have had chance to go with a standard and extended half-life product. And of course, this product, emicizumab, is an easier way of administration, no doubt, and is more manageable, especially for the younger people, is giving you a higher protection. However, we do need to have a long-term observation time. The result that we have achieved until now, I would say, is very satisfactory, no doubt about the efficacy of this drug, but we have to understand a little bit on the mucosal type of bleeding and the minor bleeding, and this kind of, more detailed information is required for that type of efficacy. And in terms of safety, to understand whether we are having the similar type of safety that we did have with other products. Once that has been established, now you need to understand what level of protection is needed for that specific type of patient. If you have an old patient sitting in a sofa, doing well, and with one or two, administration of factor 8 is doing very well and happy, they might really don't want to change it, and you don't have to push for that, I think. But if you have the patients, for example, they were not doing the prophylaxis because it was difficult, I think this group really need to switch to the emicizumab, or those patients that were not happy. I think we can make the stratification of the groups piece by piece, but at the end of the story, if this product is going to work as it is, so I think there would be always a bigger proportion of patients that they are going for the non-replacement therapy.
Yeah, I think you're seeing, obviously for the first time you're seeing a number of different choices out there, and I think in terms of the non-replacement therapies, you know, products like emicizumab, some of the considerations that people with hemophilia will look at, there's a convenience factor, subcutaneous versus intravenous, certainly a big deal for people with needle phobia or poor venous access. Some of these products can give you a higher trough and greater protection from bleeding and a steady level of protection as opposed to the up and down that you get with factor. Will it lead to less problems with joints, with less subclinical bleeding and then less chronic pain, and maybe a greater ability to do normal activities? I think some of the reluctance would be around potential side effects, reports of thrombosis, and the fact that some people are not early adapters. They'll take a wait and see attitude. And I think certainly when we look at educating large groups of patients and parents about this, you'll see this with all these new technologies. You'll see those who are very keen to embrace the new and latest treatment immediately. You'll see some who are late adapters who have a wait and see attitude. I'll wait a year or two and see how any side effects that become apparent after licensing. And then a lot of people are in the middle. They may not switch immediately, but they will be very keen to learn fairly quickly and then keep an eye on it for perhaps a year before switching.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a number of discussions that you do hear back about people trying to balance what their strengths are, and if you're very extremely active and you need those very high levels of protection, people are less are considering a switch or not a switch for themselves in a very different way than somebody who is, as you said, not that active. And also in terms of, we see information coming out of in terms of intracranial hemorrhages, that's, you're still not fully protected against those sorts of things, that it is a consideration.
Yes, and we'd have a significant number of people, and especially parents, who would say, my child is doing really well on his current therapy. He's on an extended half-life factor. He's very active. He plays these sports a couple of times a week. So I think you also have to educate the population and the parents to understand the need for peaks as well as troughs on some occasions.
Yeah, I think this is a discussion that really needs to be facilitated between the clinician and the patient. Brian, you mentioned thrombosis. We can't not talk about that. So this is one of the considerations that has come up a lot. With the bispecific antibodies, there's a number of them now in development, with the MIM8, with other ones coming out as well in the near future. And at EHAD this year, there was a presentation on the reported thrombotic events and the cardiovascular risk factors that were associated with some of them. So I think one question that I have, and you alluded to it earlier on, Flora, on the safety issue if we increase trough levels. Are we seeing, or is there a potential class effect? So is it the type of drug that may be an issue in terms of thrombosis, or is it because we are potentially raising trough levels in general, and people may have, we might be unmasking some of those people with hemophilia who have cardiovascular risk factors?
Well, surely with people with hemophilia for the first time, with all these new therapies, perhaps we are changing them for the first time into the normal population risk for thrombotic events. We've always had some level of cardioprotective effect from having low factor levels. And maybe some of this is just the impact of that being normalized through higher trough levels. But there certainly do seem to be different thrombotic issues you have to take into consideration with emicizumab, with fitusiran, with the anti-TFPIs. They all seem to have different impacts here. And we're actually seeing this discussed in some detail at the moment as well in terms of the potential impact of COVID-19 on a person with hemophilia. So maybe some of this is being normalized. I'd be very interested in Flora's view on this.
I think there are this is a very important point, and we do need to be very careful about how we're looking on the data. To be very honest, I think we do need to have better data regarding all previously used products, which we do not have. So we started with emicizumab since it was a new chapter and a new molecule in treatment of hemophilia, to look on the data more closely, which was absolutely a must. But we have a big issue, and the big issue, we are missing a denominator. And without a clear denominator is really not a good data, and we are only having some report or even the report from the company or few reports, for example, from UHAS. But this data is reporting the side effect, but we don't know exactly how many patients have been treated. And mainly, we do not know, comparing to the previously bypassing agent and to the regular factor VIII or extended life factor VIII, how was the incidences of thrombosis in different range age. Because that's, without that information, is just really not a good data. Once I became the president of the EHAD, this was my first action. I wrote to EMA and I told them, we need a round table. We have to sit and we have to look on the post-registration surveillance data of all previous products and emicizumab and every new product that are coming in the market. I'm waiting for the response from the EMA, but that's the most important action that EHC, EHAD, and all other organizations have to think about, having a good data. And regarding the thrombogenicity, I think definitely there is no doubt this new molecule is stronger to what we were used, but we have to learn how to use it alone or in association. And if you look on the data on thrombosis, most of this new molecule did have a trouble when there was an association with other molecules, when there is acute bleeding, surgery, or something like that. So I think we need also to understand the potency of our molecules, particularly in association with other components and in different situation associated with the risk factor, like people with a chronic disorder, cardiovascular, hypertension, COVID, or any other condition that could increase the hypercoagulability of the patients.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting broad discussion, and it's really good to see that UHAS have now put thrombotic events on their adverse event open page, and we see a lot more than just reported in than in the non-replacement therapy. So it is a background issue.
Yeah, this was again EHAD action for understanding, and I think EHC was contacted too. So doing something at the European level for even COVID and understanding what is happening.
At the WFH Global Forum last year, and also at EHAD this year, there was a discussion on the closure of one clinical trial for anti-TFPIs, and then we had a later issue with pausing on another one. We still have a couple more in the pipeline, and just wondering with the anti-TFPIs, with the fituserans, with the those type of rebalancing agents, what additional information, if these come to the market, do we need to consider for patients? So from a patient organization side or from a patient choosing side, what additional supports do we need for these type of therapies, we're really not sure. Like fitusiran this year, last year, came out with the the treatment level for using factor 8, factor 9, and the bypassing agents in a very good poster. So it was a really good example of this is how you treat. From a clinical perspective, Flora, what should be patients thinking about if they're on one of those products? And Brian, from a patient organization side, how do we put those in place? Like, I think hopefully you'll talk about something like the identity cards, or the blood severe bleeding disorder alert cards, that type of thing. Flora first.
Yeah, I mean, for again is just the beginning of the usage of novel molecules, and we do not them very well. If I would be a patient when some side effect is going to be out, I want to know exactly what was the situation and how that happened. Now we have two components of anti-TFPI, that the first one was associated in the high dose with arterial thrombosis. And the second component has been used for such a long time, and now again we are hearing even this component had 3, if I'm not wrong, thrombotic event, but still is really not enough information. I think what we have to ask from the company to come up as soon as possible with the transparent data about what is happening and how is the thrombosis, what type of thrombosis, and giving the possibility to the scientists to understand whether there is any difference, the big difference between the different components, like anti-TFPI, Mirna for anti-thrombin like fitusiran you were mentioning, or any other product that could come up with a non-replacement therapy, or is just drug related to a specific type of drug. So that's something which the hemostasis community should understanding. For understanding that, we need the data. We need to understand very well. For example, I have no clue about the second clinical trial, whether the thrombotic event, what type of thrombosis was there, or it was associated with other type of drugs like factor 8. It was normal factor 8, or it was extended half-life product. So if I would be a patient, I need to understand more for that one. For example, fitusiran, I think at this point of time, when the COVID is frequent all over the world, I want to know exactly how is the level of D-dimer of the patient when they get enrolled. So as you know, the COVID is associated with the increased level of D-dimers, but that might not help very much, because this patient could have a high level of D-dimer, but could be also a good biomarker, because if I know as a patient I'm using the fitusiran and my level of D-dimer is just a little bit higher, what is the level? And if I get infected with COVID, what's going to happen, and how my physician should understand my condition. So I think really at this point, from patient point of view and from physician point of view, we need to be more transparent and bringing more data to the society in order to understand better the new component.
Brian, in terms of the patient community and making sure that when these products come to the market, what sort of things should patient organizations be thinking about? Brian,
can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I think what's really important for people with hemophilia on these new therapies is to be told to have it clearly explained to them what is the protocol for treating a breakthrough bleed, and how and when should you contact your comprehensive care center. And I think this also increases the importance.
We lost Brian.
Comprehensive a statement talked priority exclusively by comprehensive care centers. I think I think that is really important. That remains important. You're not going to have the average person with hemophilia wanting to or being able to understand all of the complexities of this. What they need to be told very clearly is what happens when you get a bleed, how do you treat that bleed, at what point do you contact your comprehensive care centre, and you should perhaps have with you in your wallet at all times a special card which explains to a non-comprehensive care hospital doctor that I'm on this therapy and you should phone this number if I come into you for treatment.
Thank you, Brian. So we'll move on for the time to gene therapy. The first gene therapies are for factor VIII, will possibly be licensed this year. Hopefully COVID won't slow any of that down. And the factor IXs maybe next year, slightly beyond. With them finally being this close, you know, they're not 5 years away now. They're definitely, you know, this year. It's very interesting times, and the questions that patients need to be thinking about when they're considering this type of therapy. Brian, do you want to take that one first in terms of a discussion?
Yeah. So, and let's say you're faced with a licensed gene therapy and have a discussion, what sort of things should you be thinking about? And I would think they would include the following. You know, what would my likely factor expression be on this gene therapy? And how predictable is this? So I don't want to know probably what kind of factor expression I would expect to get, and also within what sort of range. So it would have to be a relatively narrow range. What's my likely duration of expression and likely minimum duration? I think in years, primarily as it impacted on your potential loss of expression. So you'd have a concern about, will I get transaminitis? What are the risks of that? How closely will I be monitored for that? And in terms of long term, I think the big concern would be the risk of insertion and mutagenesis from the gene therapy. You'd have to think about, what about the possibility of future retreatment? If you're telling me that my duration of expression might be 5 to 10 years, what happens after 5 to 10 years? Can I confidently expect that at that point you would have solved the retreatment conundrum, where at the moment you can't be retreated? And so with these questions, somebody will think to themselves, will I go now and take this gene therapy? Will I wait a couple of years for the next generation? So I think it's all to play for.
Laura, with the treatment being possibly you know, a one and done treatment, you know, in how we think about you know, one injection and you sustain a level for a very, very long period of time. We've had, Brian mentioned transaminitis, and kind of that's the raising of the liver enzymes for patients. There's some discussion on steroids and prophylactic steroids. If you know, if I maximize my one chance, can you go through some of the ideas or concerns that you may have in terms of taking steroids or avoiding steroids to try and maximize that opportunity? And I think, you know, you've talked in the past about models of care where a treating center is really key and expert, and then you go to that center and then you go back home and work or be treated in your home center. Can you?
Yeah, I still believe, and this is a discussion that is ongoing with our colleagues from the US, and I think in Europe we have to point out with the model of hub and spoke. We need, at least for the beginning, for the first 3 years or 5 years, when we get more and more experience in the treatment of the patient using gene therapy, we have to start with the big centers where there is a facility to understand where for example, any type of side effect could happen, or any increase of ALT and AST, as you mentioned. So how much corticosteroid I have to use, for how long time I have to use, and whether I have to inject the patient before the treatment, or I have to wait and to see what's going to happen. That's a very good question, actually. And I think still, scientifically talking, I haven't seen enough data that could convince me using or not using it, which is more beneficial for the patient. Because my experience, for example, for the patient that I had, they didn't have any side effect and they are doing well. And I'm thinking, why I have to treat them with a corticosteroid if they are doing well? And in particularly in a time that I'm living with the COVID in Milan, and you know, and I would wait and to see, and immediately when the level of ALT and AST if is getting jump, I would start the treatment. But for how long time I have to treat them? Because the first clinical trial with Amit and Ted, they started to treat the patient, I think, for almost a month or something. And there is some discussion, but again, not clear report that some of the patient for other type of clinical trial showed that if you stop after a month of corticosteroid treatment, the event of the increase of ALT and AST might re-happen, and that would make an indication to treat the patient not 1 month but for a longer period of time in order not having the recurrence of the you know, the liver damage. So I think all over, again, we need to have data. And for having the data, so I think BioMarin is the company with the highest number of treated patients. We have to pull all the data first, one company with the highest number, then making a meta-analysis of the data all together, especially for those vectors that they are similar, to understand if there is any common behavior in terms of the steroid therapy that could be joined together and give us the conduction and the guide on how to treat the patient. So for doing so, I think even if the product is getting licensed, I cannot even imagine that every patient and every doctor could prescribe the drug and make an injection to the hemophilic patient. That would be ridiculous. I mean, I cannot really imagine that. And I think we need to, at least in Europe, to work on it and to make things a little bit more clear, more established for the safety and better efficacy for our patients in the future.
Yeah, I think pulling it all together, and I think, you know, initiatives like the gene therapy the global gene therapy registry will obviously be excellent in pulling that forward. But there's a lot to think about, right? We've talked about this before, where you almost want somebody to talk you out of it and then still make the decision. Like, and the original Natwani trials, they had was it a bioethicist who
Yes.
just went through it. It's a really interesting point. I think what sort of things do we need to put in place to not so the people don't have this buyer's regret that we sometimes hear about, because it's
a good question, Declan. This is the first irreversible therapy. You can't change your mind the day after. So once you get treated with a gene therapy vector, that's it. You've had the vector. You can't change your mind, and that's never been the case before. So I think we need very clear educational materials for people with hemophilia. We need booklets. We need publications. We need videos. We need online content, and we also need to organize groups of meetings for groups of people with hemophilia, where we give them enough of a baseline and enough information about the therapy, frankly in a group setting, where we actually prepare them to the point where they are then ready to go in to meet a Flora Pivandi or a Mike Marcus or somebody else and have an informed discussion about this. But I think it's very difficult for a person who knows nothing about gene therapy to go into their clinician and sit down and expect that clinician to explain all of this to them to the point where they can then make an informed decision. This is not one consultation. This is a process of learning, of videos, of written material, of meetings, and certainly what we did here before anybody participated in a clinical trial. Before they had the meeting with the clinicians, we had group meetings with groups of people with hemophilia, together with clinicians and the gene therapy company, to discuss all of this, to have a presentation. And what we found was that somebody in the room would ask a question which really somebody else hadn't thought of and gave them more information. So it's a process of continuing education. And certainly I don't think this is This is not a rapid decision to take. I think patients need to be very well informed. You don't want buyer's regret. At the same time, I think this is something we've been waiting for many, many years. It's a very exciting threshold in terms of the science of haemophilia, but we must really work hard to make sure that people are as well educated about this as possible before making the decision to take gene therapy.
Yeah.
Declan, maybe something I have to mention. As you know, the ISTH is doing a huge plan for, really is a big program of 5 years for the education. And I think the patients organization like World Federation and AHC has to collaborate with the ISTH, because, you know, the people who are doing this job is always the same people, and we do not want to make a duplication. And I think this two organizations have different type of duties. So the scientists should think about what is the state of the art of the science and where we are going. And then patient organization should think about how to make the communication to the patient, as Brian was saying, is very important. The language that is used and the language of the scientist and clinician is not, we know that, is not the language of the patients. Patient needs to understand and needs to be sure that their real question is going to be solved. And for that one, there is a need of the patient's organization. And I think we have to work together, all of us, for that.
Yeah, that's very, very, very true. Although those sort of lexicons that we hear about are going to be very important in translating the science, because the science, you know, we've talked about it before. You work from a patient organization and try and have your science level up here, and, you know, translate that to patients who sometimes find it difficult. But the science for gene therapy is just way up here, and the jump is very, very significant.
Yeah.
Although
it's literally a different language.
Yeah.
It's a different language.
Yeah.
So you also need that lexicon to be able to translate these different language words back into English or whatever for people.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's true. And one thing I really think we need to think about, I mean, not probably like a patient's organization, but has some effect. And I was thinking again these days. So the level of expression by different assays has a very important role for, how can I say, for the mind of the patients. For example, when you start a gene therapy, you start to have some expression which is getting 10% and the other assay is showing 20%. And I have the patient sitting in the front of me and saying, okay, so what is the level? So it's very important to know that. Maybe a physician says, okay, but what is the problem? Is about 10 to 20? No, I want to know exactly what the hell is the expression. I think that kind of stuff is important, and we need to really to focus a little bit as a scientist, and also understanding this doubt in the patient, and that is missing to my feeling.
It's a very fair point, but I will make one comment. I was in a shopping center recently, and I do think some gene therapy language is coming into the general population, as a woman referred to her two children as vectors. So I'm gonna move on to von Willebrand's for a while. So we're seeing a huge change in the von Willebrand's space. ISTH have their latest guidelines out as of last week for review. EHC are developing the VWD platform. WFH have the WFH initiative. We have the first recombinant von Willebrand's factor on the market now. What changes do you think is going to happen in terms of treatment for people with von Willebrand's around these activities? For me, when I was looking at the women and bleeding disorders data, it seemed the concept of prophylaxis seemed very, very fluid. You have to balance the factor 8 with the von Willebrand's that's in the product. Some patients have low. Where are we going with von Willebrand and better treatment?
You know, Declan, here is a little bit different from hemophilia, and we are behind what we are for hemophilia. So for years and years, we were having only few combined factor 8 and von Willebrand plasma-derived products, which was having more or less similar amount of factor VIII and von Willebrand. We had only one single product which was having twice 2.5 von Willebrand factor compared to factor VIII. So there was not really so much choices, to be honest. So the people were used to treat the patient with this product. And for prophylaxis, again, we were really far away to what we are for hemophilia. And that's the reason why I'm seeing the people, the patients at my age in my center, that they have the arthropathies. And this is ridiculous if you think about, because they are not doing the prophylaxis, and they were not doing prophylaxis. If you compare the level of and the number of the people who are on the prophylaxis with the severe von Willebrand compared to severe hemophilia, there is a big difference, because we were not doing prophylaxis in these patients, and we started only a few years ago. So that's the first step. We need to improve the prophylaxis, and we have to treat the patient, those severe, because they are about 10%. They are not all of them. And we have to make a good decision, type 3, some of the type 2, and we have to understand that what is the severe cases. The second point is, now we have the pure product, plasma-derived pure product, and we have the recombinant von Willebrand factor. And these products are completely different compared to what we had. Why they are different? Because you have to learn how to use them. You cannot use these products alone during acute bleeding or during the acute surgery. But if you are not using factor VIII in combination with them, when the level of factor VIII in your patients with von Willebrand is very low. But if you have a surgery which is planned before, or you want to use it prophylaxis, you don't need to use any factor VIII, because this product by themselves alone, in few hours, they can jump the level of factor VIII because they are binding to factor VIII, and you don't need to add some other factors. So this is education. Not all the physicians do understand exactly this point. So that means we are bringing a new chapter in the treatment, and we are bringing a recombinant product, which is the first recombinant product is coming to the market. And also we have to understand about the safety and efficacy of this product in terms of the efficacy and in terms of the safety and thrombogenicity. So there are lots of stuff, and how we have to measure it. We do use the RECOF assay, we use the collagen binding assay. So there are different points, and I think we are happy that finally we have the first recombinant product, we have the plasma-derived pure von Willebrand factor, but we have also to start to make a movement about how to do it. And that's the reason why the guideline, I think, of the ISTH World Federation and what is the third one? Is the ISTH World ASH, yeah, American Society of Hematology. 3 of them, they try to put together the data.
Brian, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, I certainly think from talking recently to quite a large number of people with von Willebrand's as part of our strategic planning process, there's certainly, I think, a pent-up demand for more home treatment and more prophylaxis in that group. A lot of them are not on prophylaxis, and some of them feel they should be. I think we need more research on the implications of having low von Willebrand levels. I think for many of our organizations, we have for many years conflated von Willebrands and put it in the same basket as women with bleeding disorders. And so therefore we've also neglected men with von Willebrands, and they have problems. I think von Willebrands has been relatively neglected within our community. And even if you're out there and you have a new diagnosis of von Willebrand's and you Google it, do you even know that haemophilia societies provide services and support for people with von Willebrand? So I think we all need to start thinking about changing the taglines of our organizations to make it clear that we're inclusive of von Willebrand's and rare bleeding disorders. And also another point, by the way, which I think is important. Why are we calling it von Willebrand's disease? A lot of people don't like that. Why can't we call it von Willebrand disorder? Flora, could you comment on that?
No, I agree with you. I think we can call it von Willebrand disorder, and also because there are few cases of von Willebrand, especially type 1, that still is not justified by the mutation on von Willebrand gene that we are used to look for, and that conditions is still is under investigation, and I agree that should be called the disorder.
That's a very, very good point. And we do see things changing quite rapidly. We hopefully will see a lot more access, better treatment, possibly even, we have the 10 principles of hemophilia care, the 10 principles of management for inhibitors. Hopefully maybe we get to a couple of principles for the overall care of patients with all von Willebrand's.
Why not 10?
But 10 is a good number. Then we have a solid 30. You can cut them into the stone. One of the things I'm going to move on again because we're running short of time. For the rare bleeding disorders, Flora, at EHAD this year, there was a very exciting poster presentation on Glanzmann's gene therapy. So the GT, it sounds like a really fancy, fast car, but it was very exciting. Can you just give a really quick overview of that for patients with Glanzmann?
Yeah, I think, the Glanzmann-Berner-Soulier and all other platelet disorder, even these guys, they are neglected, and we do not have really, in some of the patients, we have the trouble and they are not responding to the treatment. So I don't know when we would be able with the gene therapy to cure the platelet disorders, but definitely in the future, if we have the good models of the gene therapy with a good safety and things like that, we might want to consider that. And the group that was working is a Spanish group. Unfortunately, at this point, because of the COVID, they have slowed a little bit the progress in their activity because they are busy in some other field now. But yes, I think that was one of the projects that has been selected for the EHAD. And in terms of Glanzmann, some of these patients, they really do not have so much treatment, and some of them are terribly bleeding, and they are not responding. They are not responding to the platelet infusion, to the factor 7A, and some of them went through the bone marrow transplantation. So really, I think there are some of the rare disorders and some of the platelet disorder need further attention. Since now we are doing a better job with the hemophilia, we can move on, and we have to work on these groups.
Yeah, thank you, Flora. So I will move on to my last question, and we obviously can't leave COVID aside. It's devastated the entire globe in terms of healthcare, political, economy. It's an absolutely a massive changing scenario. But so I want to take a second and talk about some of the changes that it has been forced upon us. We've responded incredibly quickly in terms of telemedicine, which possibly should have happened years ago, but we just didn't have the time or the space. Possibly collecting, we've seen some patients get blood tests collected at home for some aspects to keep people out of the hospital. These are things that we're doing now for COVID, but I'm going to ask two questions. One, what are the positive things that we can learn from what has been implemented for the treatment of patients with hemophilia? And two, when we think about gene therapy and we think about the concept of that hub and spoke model, where you need that really good link, how do we monitor patients better and make it easier for them to take part in clinic or in trials or follow up or whatever it may be? And the questions go to both of you on that.
Do you want me to start, or you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think COVID taught us a lot at this period, as you said. And for example, in my center, which is a big center with 300 severe cases and more than thousands of patients with all type of disorders. So we are having the 24 hours, people who are available, physicians who are available for the patient. But we do not have a good telemedicine. And I thought, it's ridiculous. My center is doing a COVID, and I have a full activity with telemedicine for COVID. But for hemophilia center, we are doing by phone, but we are not doing the telemedicine. So I thought it would be nice that we are making monitoring all the calls from the hemophilia patients and to understand how many percent of those you need to see the patient and how many you can just solve it by phone. For example, if somebody, especially those moms that they think maybe their children, they could have the bleeding, they're not sure to treat or not treating. So we have to improve. We have to improve really by telemedicine helping them. And I was working also with the informatic group in our center to understand whether we can have an ultrasound system managing the bleeding, the minor bleeding in the patient in a way that a patient with a mobile phone could just use the mobile phone and putting on their knees and and that is coming to our center and we can see whether there is a bleeding or not. And how we can do it by monitoring hundreds and hundreds of bleeding and trying to come up with some kind of algorithm, and that kind of algorithm could help us to understand whether there is a bleeding or not. So this project was ongoing when COVID happened. So now I think really after this mess of COVID, that would be my priority, to work on the telemedicine and helping really to improve the quality of care of patients and making it easier for them.
Great.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has accelerated trends which were
Yeah.
starting to happen and which were happening sometimes reluctantly and slowly from hospitals. Telemedicine, phone clinics, video clinics. As you know, Declan, here in Ireland, we've been planning for the last year or two to roll out a patient portal. That's now being accelerated. But we now have video consultations. We have phone consultations. We had started doing phone clinics for people with mild hemophilia von Willebrand's, and now that's being extended to severe. And I can tell you that the centre directors have said to me they're not sure a lot of the severe patients will want to be coming into routine clinics anymore because they really like the phone clinics. The other thing that's changed, of course, is the way that we all interact. Here we are this morning doing a meeting by Zoom. So I think healthcare professionals, multidisciplinary teams, meetings are happening by Zoom. They're happening with Microsoft Teams and Skype. And I think this is not going to go away. I think we may see less international meetings. We may see they certainly will still be needed. There's no replacement for face-to-face interaction. But I think the number might be smaller. We'll
Absolutely.
see a lot more efficient working like this. This is time efficient. You have people who can actually connect very quickly. You can have a clear consultation and you're not spending half the time traveling to and from. And I remember a similar situation to this in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks in the USA, when some meetings were cancelled and people did the meetings virtually. The difference at the time was technology was expensive, it was slow, and so it didn't really take off. This time it's taking off. I don't see us going back from this to the way things were. I think you'll see much more virtual working. I think you'll see more flexibility in terms of working from home. You'll see more interaction between clinicians and patients and between clinicians and their colleagues by remote means like Zoom, Skype or Microsoft Teams. I think the world has changed permanently because of this.
I fully agree.
Yeah, I do entirely agree. And it's great to see patient organizations do lunch meetings. So you literally have to go nowhere. You can still interact with people and get the information and keep it short and timely and still have time for the other things in your life. I had my first physiotherapy telemedicine appointment recently, and it's a bit strange at first, but it is something that I agree we've really changed how we work, how we interact, and it's also really nice to see friends on video and over long distances. So thank you both for the time this morning. I really appreciate it. A really interesting discussion. I hope everybody at home enjoyed that. And thank you very much.
Okay, Declan. Okay, Flora. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much.